Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review 1408. I loved the theme of this movie, like a haunted hotel or inn or little nook and Airbnb and all that jazz. So you get like several different kind of small varieties here. So really, this kind of reminded me of the Steve Guttenberg, Peter O'Toole movie High Spirits, or it gave me like the Shining vibes or Ghostbuster, the first one vibes. The Kane movies, like See No Evil, or yeah, See No Evil, something like that. Like the former WWE Kane did a movie about a hotel, and it was weird. So if I didn't get that title right, then it is what it is. So it also reminded me of like a snidbit of like In the Mouth of Madness, because I also saw that movie, the John Carpenter film, which actually was pretty interesting. But anyways, so 1408, what's this about? Let's go into it. So Mike Estlin, who is played by John Cusack in this movie, Mike is to go on and go through all these inns and these hotels and these locations. And so Tony mentioned that like a interesting place to go is Bar Harbor, or a place in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Thanks for the reference. So we have Mike, who is to go on and never have seen a ghost, never been afraid, and so Mike has to forcibly go on, and great things askew just because like he just like has never really been able to get a like a real rise out of any of these places. And so Mike all of a sudden is looking for a challenge, and all of a sudden he is to find himself getting a postcard from the Dolphin Hotel, or the Dolphin. I think it's a Dolphin Hotel, and he, of course, is to get this postcard saying "Don't go into 1408." And Mike is like, oh, okay, all right. Well, like I think there's a challenge here. So Mike is to go on and research 1408, and is to see that there's quite a bit of history in there. And so he meets with Olin, who is the manager of this place. And the more and more that Mike is stubbornly wanting to go into this room, the more Gerard here, or Gerald here, Olin, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson, has to go on and grant Mike his wanting of going into this room. So Mike is to go on and go through this room, and slowly but surely, like there's little things here and there, but then all of a sudden we get further and further into this film to where it feels like the whole room is cracking up, and Mike is drowning within his room, and horrible things are happening. And so grading wise, because otherwise you can go on and see this kind of anywhere, hence why the easy reason for me to want to review this movie, because it's a fairly convenient film. uh Really, it's on like Amazon right now for free. So honestly, I would just recommend that. But it seems like on Google there is some options, but still, if it's on Amazon for free, then where else do you need to see 1408 besides probably Voodoo, VUDU? That's where I went, and that's where I went and saw it. I'm like, man, if I probably would have gone on to another app, would have had less ads. I'm curious. So, but yeah, so 1408, I would have to say I loved this movie. I would say that it has to be, it probably has to be an epic film. I think it's just like There's so many interesting things about this that I would like. It's interesting me so well that I want to go on and see so many movies like this. And so like that's like the best kind of movie where it like intrigues you and want to see more of something like this. Um, and it feels like it's fairly rare. Um, it could feel a lot like The Shining, but still, it could have that kind of very rare kind of feel. So, epic movie. Go and see it if you've never had. It's so, man, do I miss these this kind of theme, and I didn't realize it until I watched this movie how I would just kind of feel um, about maybe just a haunting movie. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just a haunting movie. It's just kind of got me so intrigued. So, with that said, take that with what you will, because I think it's my time to spill and go into spoilers about this film. So at the end of the day, I would say, excuse me, go out of your way, watch this film. Don't even go into knowing all the spoilers. Just watch it, just see it, and enjoy it. So with that said, let's just double five this bad boy up. Let's just go into spoilers. Because it's about that time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this piece, we of course have Mike, who's just kind of driving around, trying to figure out where exactly this one Weeping Beach Inn is. And so it seems that Mike is to drive a little bit too far and then is to head back to finally make it to the Weeping Beach Inn. So Mike is to go on to the Weeping Beach. Wow. Wow, that just flew out there. Weeping Beach Inn. So Mike goes to meet with the hostesses of this place, and they are to be rattling on about like, oh well, like someone died within the staircase, and that you see this picture with this shadow in the background of it. Oh, and Mike is like, yeah, yeah, that's great. And so Mike is to go on and say like, well, I heard like all of the scariest stuff would be happening in the attic rooms. Can I get one of those? And the woman's like, sure. So Mike goes on into this room and is to have his EMS and all these kind of supernatural devices. He doesn't have a Ouija board, but you would think an EMF is enough. So Mike is to go on and go through this room and is just kind of look around, just describe it and whatever. And so Mike is to spend a night in this room, and nothing happened. Nothing at all happened. So afterwards, Mike is to give his criticism about this place, how it seems uh, the Weeping Beach Inn can go on and have like certain arrangements of certain kind of foods, and Mike will give it 6 skulls. No, wait, 5 skulls. And so Mike, of course, is to end up moving on to go to some book signing. Mike, of course, is to go to this bookstore and mention, like, well, hey, like, I'm here for the big event. And so this guy behind this counter is like, oh, okay, well, I guess I need to go on and like arouse everyone's like curiosity about this big event. So the bookstore guy is just starting to rattle on everything off of this page about Mike Estlin. And so Mike is like, oh, okay, thanks. And so Mike goes on behind this table and is to start seeing that there's like a handful of people all here. And so Mike is to go on and is to really just start like talking about this book and then he is just like do a little bit of Q&A. So we have one woman who is to ask Mike, what's the scariest place that you've ever been? And Mike is like, oh, well, like, I've never heard that question before. I'm just joking. Like, So, because Mike is just kind of holding on to a fan. So, Mike, of course, is to mention the Bar Harbor and is to mention about the St. Cloud, Minnesota location, and how there, of course, has something to do with a wedding and has something to do with the baby, I think, being drowned in the early stages of this. So Mike uh, is to really just go on and start rattling off about things, and so Mike then is to just start like signing books, and we of course have the guy who is kind of working behind the counter ask Mike, it's like, well, hey, where can I see a ghost, like, guaranteed? And Mike is saying like Haunted Mansion in Orlando. Because one other person was to question him about like, well, hey, like, you seriously have never seen a ghost in any of these locations? And Mike is like, no, because I've gone on and used all kinds of equipment and couldn't get a thing. And so the guy's like, oh, okay. So Mike is to go on and it's to realize that he's never really been tested. And so we also have a woman who's to come through the line that is to have a different book than what everyone else is to have, and it's to be The Long Road Home. And Mike is saying, like, well, like, where'd you get this from? And she's like, well, eBay. And Mike is like, well, how much was this for? She's like, well, there wasn't much of any bidders. And Mike was like, well, yeah, of course there wasn't. And so the woman has to ask Mike about the story and, like, if Mike wrote that from somewhere because the dad was a real piece of work. And Mike was like, well, it wasn't true. So, like, and he was. So Mike handed this girl the book back, and so like it's kind of interesting how this book just kind of keeps coming up, and so one way or the other. So Mike is to go on and get all these kind of new things, all these postcards, all these letters, and all these items, one way or the other. And so he ends up getting this postcard from the Dolphin Hotel, the Dolphin Inn. Not quite sure. You can correct me because it is what it is. So Mike goes on and is to see this postcard that says, don't go into room 408. So he's like, that seems like a challenge. So we have Mike who is to decide to call this hotel and ask for this room. And every time he is to call, the people are to say that it's unavailable. And Mike is like, well, like, is it available, like, the next month? And they're like, unavailable. And he's like, the next summer? Unavailable. So Mike is to call his publisher, who is Sam Farrell, who is with Clay the lawyer. And Sam is mentioning, like, hey, you better kind of hurry up with this conversation because this guy's $400 an hour. And so come to find out, there is some law that is to say if a room is available, that someone can go on and request that room and they have to give it to you. And or otherwise they'll go on and they'll sue them and all kinds of stuff trying to get this room. So we have Mike going like, oh, okay, well, I can get this room then. So Mike, of course, is to make his way all the way to the Dolphin Inn, or the Dolphin Hotel. And I'm going to say inn now, because inn just sounds more interesting. So Mike makes it into this place, so I never have to say it again. So Mike is to meet with the girl behind the counter and is to want her key, his key for his room, and so we of course have the assistant manager. I think it's the assistant manager. It doesn't matter because it just doesn't. Um, Going on and wanting to call Allen in. So we have Samuel Jackson who's playing Allen, and so Allen, of course, is to have Mike go into another room so they can talk privately, and so Allen is to try to bribe Mike at some points to just be like, well, hey, like here's this really nice like cognac or something like that that's like $800, and like here, like can I persuade you with this? And Mike's like, I feel like I'm getting a bribe here. And so it seems that both Mike and Allen are to do or to both know everything about this room, as it seems that Mike has gone on and done a number of research about the 22 deaths. And Allen is like, well, yeah, that's great, but you don't know also about the natural deaths that has also happened in there. I think Allen was to say that there was like 56 deaths in there in total, and so Allen, for the fear of someone dying in there, is to have Allen actually go on and have maintenance come in there and clean in that room for 10 minutes at a time, and the door is opened, and so yeah, so and like they only do that like once a month to kind of keep maintenance up, but still like, and Mike is like, well, why don't you just kind of board the room if that's such a problem? And Allen's like, well, like we can't go on and do that, like we can't like have this belief that there's a 13th floor in the hotel. So like it's just all like superstition. They just write it off as all just superstition, that no matter how many people have died in that room, they're still not going to go on and say it's like, well, like we have to keep the room available. But they just try to write it off and get anybody to go on and try other different rooms. Like when Allen is to come to this place, or when Mike is to come to this place, Allen is to try and give him like a penthouse suite or something much more better, and Mike is like, nope, give me my room. So Allen is to even like sweeten the deal with the record of every death that had happened in that room, because Allen doesn't want to go on and clean up the mess afterwards when Mike is to die. So Allen is sweetening the deal by giving Mike all of this research of every single death, where we have an orthopedic doctor who is to go on and do work on himself within that room. We have it at one point where we had a tailor who is to cut himself and then sew himself back up. And like those are some of the stories about some of the people who had died in that room. So trying to scare Mike away from all this, but Mike is like, no, I'm still wanting to go in the room. And Alan's like, dang. So Alan, of course, is to give Mike this key because I guess most electrical items don't work in that room. And so Alan is asking Mike, hey, do you have a pacemaker? And Mike's like, no. So they go on, and so Mike is making in the room, and so now we have it where Mike is to be finally in this room. And so the very first first kind of early things that happen within this movie is we have the radio going off, and it, of course, saying that we've only just begun is to be the song that's playing. And so Mike is looking at this, like, this counter thing where it's saying that it's like, okay, like, so many people would normally only last an hour within this room. And so I guess that's a testament to the room that all of a sudden we have an alarm clock that is counting down an hour. So the first, and so yeah, like I'm gonna try as much as possible to do all this early stuff in order, but there's gonna be some spots where eventually, like, we're just gonna get to a certain transitional point where I'm just like, okay, I think all of this happened within this time of the movie, but it may not be in order, and then we'll try to get our way to the end and rattle this all off. So the first thing is that Mike is to go on and notice that there is some readjusting done in these rooms, where Mike is to start to go through certain rooms, and one, he is to point out all the traditional paintings that he is to go on and see, and that these paintings are like the oldest classical paintings you can have in this room. But then Mike is to also go on and go into the bathroom and like mess with the toilet paper, and to go on and do a a number of things that when Mike is to go back into the bathroom, he's to realize he's like, wait a minute, oh my god, like, we have some kind of ghost with some turn down service, some kind of spirit. Man, is this like something interesting? It's something to write about. And so Mike, of course, was to also get scared by the radio or of the alarm clock when the alarm clock radio turned on. And so Mike is to also be hearing thin walls, hearing some woman with some child that is crying. And so, but the real thing here is a ghost that is to all of a sudden adjust things. And so Mike is thinking like, well, wait a minute, like somebody's pulling a Houdini here, and I think I'm going on and I'm doing certain things in certain rooms, and the actual person is to be hiding in some closet or some armoire or something somewhere that I'm just gonna find them like, aha. So Mike tries to go and find this aha moment, and it just never happens. And so we have it where Mike's like, okay, well, like, man, is it starting to get really like hot in here, and he's trying to adjust the thermostat, and the thermostat is broken, and so Mike is just sweating. So Mike, of course, is to call down to the front desk and is to ask for a hotel engineer repairman to come to fix his thermostat. So Mike is to call for this man, and so the repairman is to open this door and is to tell Mike how exactly to fix this because he's not going in that room. Do you know what happens in this room? And Mike's like, yeah, like I'm fine with it. So we have the repairman that is to tell him to pull the thing out and adjust the mercury thing to just kind of like just bop it a little bit and it should be fine. And Mike is like, oh yeah, like it is kicking in. They're like, thank you, you're a gentleman and a scholar. And as the guy is to leave, and Mike is like, well, hey, I'll give you a tip. And the guy is like running off because he's like, no, like I'm not gonna deal with that. I'm not gonna have anything that you want. So Mike is like, okay, that was weird. So Mike Mike is to continue on going into this room, and so we have it where at one point Mike is to be uh, opening up this window. And so Mike is to kind of look out the window, and he is to kind of rattle off information about like the neighborhood and so on and so forth. And so we also have a moment later on where Mike is to take this lamp and like chuck it out the window, and the lamp just disappears. And but that happens like later on when like Mike is just trying to get people's attention. But anyways, so Mike is to eventually uh, come from out of this window, and the window ends up slamming on Mike's hand, and he ends up starting to bleed. And so Mike is rushing into the bathroom, and when he's trying to put water over his hands, all of a sudden water is now scalding hot. And so Mike is using these towels feverishly trying to figure out how to turn off this sink. So Mike at this point is calling the front desk, complaining that now he's hurt. I'm hurt. Like I want to just get the heck out of here now. And so Mike at this point, he's like, you know what, room, like you've won. Like you've gotten to me. And so now I'm gonna get the heck out of here. And here's where things start to get very murky. And I'm going to try to do my best at this point to try to remember everything. So Mike is to try to leave this room, and Mike at certain points had struggled to open this door before, but now it seems that he is to realize that he can't open this door, and he has to just try to like adjust this doorknob, and the doorknob falls off, and he's like, okay, all right, well I guess I'm stuck in this room, because he's been in there far too long now. So Mike is to start to go on and really just desperately figure out if there's some way for him to go on and try a number of things, a number of situations to eventually alert people. And so what Mike goes on and does is he won he is to hear the woman and the baby crying in the next room, and so Mike is like banging on this wall hoping that this woman will hear him and ask for help, which the noises just get louder and louder and louder to where Mike is to fall over and he's to hurt his ears hearing this noise, to where Mike just takes this chair and bashes it against this wall and it completely breaks. So Mike then is to see this person on the other side of this like this other apartment complex next adjacent his, or alongside his. So Mike is to try to weigh this guy down, and all of a sudden, more and more that Mike is to move, Mike notices that whoever this guy is to move in the same pattern, same way that he does, and he's getting a little confused. So Mike is to take this lamp and put it in front of his face, and he is to look outside the window and realize that the person looking back at him is him. And he's like, oh my god. And so that Mike is going on and being attacked by some guy wielding some weapon, and some claw hammer weapon. And so now Mike is to look behind him and see that same claw hammer guy. And so Mike is just kind of backing away, and all of a sudden this guy disappears. He's like, oh my god. So now we go on and we start to have Mike, who is starting to see these staticky looking ghosts because we also have Mike who is seeing things on this TV, these homemade videos of Mike, Lily, and Katie all doing faces, and that Katie is to do like the top three people who can do the best, like horrible looking faces, and it seems that Katie wins, and it's like, well, of course she does. So, but Mike is to also see the staticky echoes of every single person who, I guess, at some point had jumped out of these rooms and done themselves in. So Mike is to consistently see these spirits, and so he's like, okay, like at this point, he's like starting to really like think that like he may not be real, or like he might be like drugged or hallucinating all this. And we have Mike just accusing everybody and the brother, thinking that the air vent that's on the ceiling is to have some camera inside of it. So Mike is to look at the map of this hotel, and Mike is to notice that it seems there is to be close a possible fire escape or just another window to another room. So Mike in his brain is thinking, it's like, well, if I go outside this room, there's a ledge there. And so if I just walk 18 steps to make it to the next window, I'll get out of this room. So Mike is just kind of thinking like, like here's the way to escape. So Mike goes on and is to get on that ledge and is starting to walk these 18 steps, and he realizes there's no window there because there's nothing but wall, and there's nowhere for Mike to go. So Mike all of a sudden gets scared by this horn, and so Mike is almost like slipping and falling and whatever. So Mike, when he gets back to the window, it seems that there's a woman who is to want to jump off or jump out of this window, and ends up scaring Mike to where Mike is now barely hanging on to this ledge. And luckily, he ends up getting back into the window and back into the room. So you would have thought after the whole window situation that Mike wouldn't have tried anything else to try to get out of this room, but eventually he tries. Also, later on in the movie, he ends up going through the air duct above and is to continue to go through there, and is to see a number of like flashbacks of his when Lily and Katie are both together, and Katie is a baby, and Lily is kind of looking up at Mike, and Mike is freaking out, and so he's going more through this air duct or this ventilation system, and there seems to be this creepy looking monsterish like character that Mike is to go on and kind of stomp out, and eventually just decide to go back into the room, and he's just still stuck here. But that happens later on. So Mike is after we get out of the window or get back to the window, Mike is to man, there was a good transition from here also. Mike goes on to God, why am I stymied here? Let me pause here for 1 second. Alright, I can do this too. So, Mike is going to his bathroom and is to go into this location where it now has his father in this hospital. And so Mike is talking to his father, and his father is mentioning that he is dead, and Mike soon will be. And Mike, of course, is to be so like terrified about that, and eventually he heads back into his bathroom, and like that whole thing is now gone. So Mike is to try every single thing that he can possibly do to try to get out of this room, knowing that, of course, trying to use the phone won't help, because when Mike is to call, the only thing that he can really call is front desk, and that, of course, is a woman who's like, well, like, you can go on and you can like check out an exclusive way, which is to hang yourself. And Mike is like, no, I don't want to do that. But that, again, that happens later on in the movie. But so Mike is to web chat with Lily on this laptop. And so this is right around where we're probably like 15 minutes left of this very first hour. And so Mike is chatting with Lily, mentioning that, like, hey, like, I'm in New York. I'm here where you are, because of course Mike was talking with Sam, the guy who plays Tony Shalhoub, his publisher, and Sam is like, well, hey, like, normally I know you don't like going to New York, and like, are you sure you want to go on and do this? And Mike is like, well, yeah, like, it's a good ending to the book, and maybe I'll get some closure here. So Mike is talking with Lily, is mentioning that she's in New York, he's in New York, and that he is to be in this hotel, and that Mike just needs Lily's help to send police to this one room to open his door. And Lily's like, well, like, if anything, I can be there in like 15 minutes. And Mike is like, no, that's not going to be enough time. But then all of a sudden, Mike's laptop is to take over, and Mike is to be talking with Lily and saying that, like, he misses Lily, and everything that was to happen with their daughter, and all of this stuff to try to comfort Lily to get her here. And then when Lily is to say, like, okay, I'm on my way, we have it where Mike, through this little clip, is kind of winking at Mike, like, yeah, like, I'm gonna bring her here for you. And Mike's like, no, don't listen to that, no. So Mike is going through the ringer here. So Mike is to go on and have it at some point where the room is starting to bleed, is to have this like massive crack in it and starting to bleed. And so Mike is like touching this crack, and it has blood in it, and he's like, oh wow, okay, all right. So the room's starting to bleed, like the Ghostbusters movie where the guy goes on, he's like, the walls were bleeding. And like, this is right around the time in the Ghostbusters movie where they had Walter Peck come in, and they have a number of the Ghostbusters really just going on and trying to convince the mayor to prevent like the whole end of the world thing, the dogs and cats living together mass hysteria moment, that whole rigmarole. Anyways, but pushing on. So Mike, like, this whole room is to eventually start coming apart, is starting to eventually the room is to just fill with water. And so we get to the point where Mike is to go on and is to eventually try to swim to the surface of this, And so now I have to go on and fill up a moment here because I forgot about it. Mike was to go on and go surfing. And so when Mike was to go on and go surfing, it seems like he caught a bad wave and he ended up getting kind of the wind knocked out of him, or he ended up just kind of getting knocked unconscious to where the surfer dude is like, "Hey man, are you okay?" And Mike ends up waking up and just kind of like brushing this off. And so all of a sudden, when Mike is to be swimming to the surface, we see this surfboard here, and Mike all of a sudden is right back in that same scenario. And when the surfer guy is to ask Mike, like, "Hey, you okay?" Mike transitions to this hospital where he's in LA. And so Mike and Lily are talking together because I guess Lily, of course, was Mike's next of kin. And so, like, Lily drove all this way to Mike because that's how much he meant to her. Or, yeah. So, Mike is going on and talking about how this 1408 experience, really rattled him, really shook him and everything. And so, Mike is going on and is to eventually be with Lily in this diner. All of a sudden, he's seeing some shadows of some ghosts from his past, and Mike is telling Lily, it's like, well, hey, maybe I'm still like not quite over that whole like 1408 thing. Maybe you should go and check me into a psych ward. I don't know. So Mike is to go on and eventually like write the whole book of 1408, and is to go on and mail this off. And so he's in this mail room, and all of a sudden we have all the people working in this mail room destroying the mail room. And so now Mike is to realize he's right back where he was before, within the 1408 room. That was to also be covered with bricks all around the windows and all around the door, because of course, when Mike was to go on and do that whole thing with going out of the window and trying to walk that ledge, when Mike was to go on and come back, all of a sudden there's bricks all the way around the room. And when Mike is to look outside the keyhole, he sees bricks in the keyhole also. It's like, okay, well, how exactly then would Mike have gone on and gotten out of this room? It doesn't make any sense. So Mike then is right back in this room, and Mike's like, "I was out! I was out!" And that's like the big reveal of Mike thinking like, "Oh, I'm out of that room. Oh, thank God. Like, what a relief." And then come to turn around, Mike is right back in that room, and he is to suffer even much more so. And so, for the wrapping up of this, we have Mike who's getting some real moments here, some real legitimate moments of Mike meeting up with Katie. And Katie is to just hug on to her father and say, it's like, well, hey, I don't want to leave, I want to stay here. And Mike's like, well, of course we can stay here, like you can come home with me, and I'm never gonna lose you again. And like you, me, and your mother, like we can all go on and and just go on and be like happy. And so, because we go on, we find out at some point in this movie that Katie was to be sick. So sick that at some point she's possibly going to die. And so Mike and Lily have to explain to Katie death because it seems like there is nothing else they can go on and do. Even though Mike is saying it's like, well, we should have fought harder. There could have been something we could have done, and yeah, there just was nothing. So so Mike is holding Katie, and Katie dies yet again. And Mike is like, no, don't take it. Don't take her from me twice. Don't take this from me again. And all while, like, a lot of, like, the tape recording is still going on through a big chunk of this, we also had a moment where Mike was desperately looking for this drink. And so he goes into this kind of mini fridge, and he weirdly is talking with Olin through this mini fridge. And like we had a moment where Mike is like just like pushing through all of these items to have them all drop, and he's like, I just wanted my drink. And then he goes right back to that $800 bottle and like continues to drink that. So Mike, after losing Katie, like, if we didn't have moments where like this room was hot and that this room had water filled into it and all numbers of other kind of scenarios, now we have to turn around and the room is getting colder, and the room is getting like -5, and it keeps continuing to go down. So Mike is to be freezing within this room, so much so that he's setting a fire and trying to burn all his like deck of cards and all these items to just kind of keep warm. And so Mike is going on and like mentioning all these things about like how like is this going to be the way things are, and is this going to be it, and so on and so forth. So after all of this stuff happens here, and even at some points where Mike is to have to kind of get hit with everything, having at points where the one sailing boat painting was the reason why all the water had gone into the room from that one painting. And at one point Mike was to go on and see all these paintings that have all adjusted and have gone more in a horror direction. So but now that Mike is to have lost Katie again and is to eventually just go on and just like, no, like, so Mike is to finally just decide now that he's like, well, like, I'm just going to go on and figure out a way to beat this room because we don't break. So Mike is to go on and decide that he's going to take the rest of this alcohol bottle, he's going to light it on fire, and he's going to toss it into the room and hope that a fire alarm goes off, so that way they have to forcibly have somebody open the door to rescue Mike. And Mike is like really proud at this moment. And so Mike is to now get rescued by these firefighters, and Mike is telling these two firefighters, don't go into that room, like, it's evil. And they're like, okay, buddy, like, all right. So Mike finally gets out of the room and is to still be in a hospital. And so now Mike has to check with Lily, like, what hospital am I in? And Lily's saying, like, well, this is, of course, like a New York hospital. And he's like, oh, thank God. So Mike is still, like, questioning, like, am I out? Am I really out of that room? And Lily's like, okay, like, what's wrong with you? So Mike and Lily are now like back into this place, and Mike, of course, is to write 1408 because he has already written this story. And so like it went down easy like the second time around. And so Mike was to go on and finish this book, and Lily is to mention about all the items that Mike was to have that was in that room, was in that 1408 room that they had retrieved. And so Mike is looking at all these items, and they're all like kind of crispy, or they all have that like burnt smell. And Mike is to take the tape recorder and is just kind of replay this tape, just kind of remembering all the stuff that he was to have gone through at that point. And all of a sudden, we had the recording of the moment where Mike was talking with Katie. And Lily was hearing this, and she dropped that box, and she was like, oh my God. And Mike was looking at Lily and just like, yeah, like, this room is no joke. So that's the way the movie just ends within 1408. I know I didn't do it perfectly. I know I could have gone on and said a number of other things. But I think at the end of the day, that is the best way to probably talk about this movie and do it all up. So with that said, let me know in the comments below how you felt about 1408 if you were to have gone on and watched this whole thing, because I usually would say that I do appreciate it, because I really do. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here, because usually on a lot of days it just takes me forever to really just hunker down, and like I'll know what I'm gonna do like the first video, but then after that it just kind of like diffuses out from that, where it's just like, oh my God, like what should I do after this? Where should I go today? Um, and so those usually end up taking a lot longer to get all those out. So without a doubt, I am going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, everybody.